So I want to talk about the use of CARRA to understand ice dynamics and winds along Nares Strait. So I just want to start with this is an animation with some SAR imagery. So what we're looking at is Ellesmere Island. I'll show you the geography in that, but Ellesmere Island is here to the north. Greenland is to the south. This is the Lincoln Sea, the Arctic Ocean up here. And this is the northern part of Nares Strait. And so one of the things that occurs along Nares Strait, which is quite interesting, is one can get these ice arches form. And these arches can be stable for months at a time. And when they're there, they restrict the motion of sea ice down through Nares Strait. So this is a sequence from 2017 in April. And in that case, there was a northern arch present here. And as I run this animation, you'll see the arch is stable. There's no motion north over the Lincoln Sea. And then the arch will collapse actually due to a wind event. And then one will see all this ice start to transport down through Nares Strait. Now, there is very thin first-year ice in Nares Strait here, and it'll move southwards, but the thick ice in the Lincoln Sea won't move until the arch collapses. So let me just start the video. So you can see how stable the ice is up here. There is this kind of thin ice blowing down through Nares Strait, and then where I'm into May, and then suddenly the arch collapsed, and all this very, very thick ice flowed down through Nares Strait. So this work, I want to acknowledge Caitlin McNeil and Alex Stevens, who are graduate students of mine. So this is the region we're talking about. Again, kind of the Eastern Arctic, the Lincoln Sea to the north, Baffin Bay to the south. Nares Strait is quite long, maybe 400 or 500 kilometers long, and it can be quite narrow in places. And there's also very steep topography, both on the Ellesmere Island side and on the Greenland side. So as I'll mention, it's a very challenging place to study with most reanalysis data sets, just because it's so narrow. And again, this is ice motion in the Arctic. Most of the ice that leaves the Arctic flows down through Nares Strait, but about 10% of it actually flows down through Nares Strait and also the Canadian Arctic archipelago here. The ice to the north of Nares Strait is the oldest ice in the Arctic. The white contours here show ice that's greater than 5 years old. And so much of the ice that transports down through Nares Strait, this is very old ice type. And one of the concerns, of course, is that in the Arctic, we're seeing this transition from essentially lots of multi-year ice to essentially just the first-year ice. And so this export down through Nares Strait is especially important because it's this very old, thick ice that's leaving through Nares Strait. Again, this is now looking at thickness, and one can see that this is the region in the Arctic where the ice is the thickest. And actually, it's the region that the ice will persist for the longest into this century. And so there's also important, so it's important to understand how much ice is being lost through Nares Strait, because this is the very old ice in the Arctic. This ice transport's highly seasonal. It typically ceases around December when an arch forms, as I showed you, and then it remains very, very low until August or so. And this is data back in 2007 from a paper by Ron Kwok. And here's the ice transport. So positive means ice is moving southwards. And you can see in this case, there was highly variable transport. Again, usually wind events that drive these large transports. And then suddenly on January 4th, the transport went to 0. It remained 0 until July when it picked up again. So this essentially was the formation of the arch. And we think that, that both the formation of the arches and also the collapse of the arches are driven by wind events. And so it's important to understand the wind events along Nares Strait, because they do control these, the formation and the breakup of these arches. At the southern end of Nares Strait, there's this region called the North Water, which is the largest polynya and the most productive polynya in the Arctic. And we think that one of the reasons why the polynya forms is one has very strong winds blowing down through Smith Sound here, and those winds just advect the sea ice southwards. Here's a satellite image showing the ice, the polynya. There's typically an ice arch present in the southern region as well, and this is ice here, and then this essentially is the open water of the North Water. And one can see in this case here, there's convective streamers that have formed, because again, one has open water here, and this is sort of indicative of very strong winds that are blowing down through Smith Sound, leading to these convective streamers over the open water of the North Water. So again, I hope I've been able to motivate that the winds are important. The challenge is that the strait's quite narrow. And so this essentially is the topography of the region in JEBCO, which is a digital elevation model. This is what the strait looks like in ERA 5. This is what it looks like in the current operational product from the European Center, which is about a 9-kilometer resolution. And this is the CARRA topography. I've also indicated with these symbols here various weather stations in the region. And as I'll talk about in a minute, there is actually some met data from a weather station at Hans Island here. But you can see the challenge using, for instance, ERA 5. It definitely there's some sort of valley, if you like, down through here, but it's definitely not capturing the really steep topography. The 9-kilometer product does a better job. It actually has the open water of the Kane Basin, but you can see how much better CARRA is. So CARRA, I think, is a really wonderful tool because it allows us to resolve the topography and the interaction of the winds. So there's a small island in the center of the channel called Hans Island, and there's about 4 years worth of automatic weather station data from this site. And this is essentially wind roses. These are the observations. This is ERA 5, this is the 9-kilometer product, and this is CARRA. And the first thing you can see from the observations is that the flow is essentially bidirectional. Either flows southwards or it flows northwards. The strongest winds are from the north, and one can get wind speeds in excess of 20 meters per second. You can see that the ERA 5, it captures the directionality, but it is nowhere near getting these extreme winds that you see. The ECOA does a better job, and CARRA again is better than the ECOA. So we are picking up these really strong winds in excess of 20 meters per second from the north. If you look at the representation of some of these extreme winds, I'm focusing here on the Smith Sound region, and these are a composite of the 95th percentile wind events. This is in ERA 5, this is in the ECOA, and this is in CARRA. And so you can see how the CARRA is picking up much stronger winds than either of these two data sets here. You can also see some of the challenges in capturing the flow in the region. It turns out in the region where one gets the narrow part of Smith Sound, the flow is very ageostrophic. So the winds are blowing across the sea level pressure contours. Downstream over the North Water, one's getting more geostrophic winds. And you can see how ERA 5 and ECOA have a real challenge in capturing this really kind of strong ageostrophic flow in this region here. What I've actually shown for CARRA is actually, it turns out there's two extreme wind events. There's wind events on the western side of the strait, as well as on the eastern side here. And you can see, if you look over the topography, you can see also regions where there's very, very strong pressure gradients here down the topography, which aren't captured in ERA 5, or some degree in ECOA. So there's lots of topographic interactions that you can resolve at 2.5 kilometers that you're not capturing at these lower resolutions. So I want to finish up with one other example. So in 2005, an ice camp was established along essentially Kennedy Channel, and they were planning to be there for a couple of months to do oceanographic and ice studies. I think a few days after the camp was established, it was destroyed by winds that were in excess of 30 gusts. They've gusted to 30 meters per second, and you can imagine the amount of work that went into establishing this ice camp, and it was just destroyed. It turns out there's lots of historical data that shows that the winds along the strait are very, very extreme, but this ice camp was unfortunately established during one of these really strong events. So one of the things we've been looking at is how extreme was this event, and we have some preliminary results here. what I'm showing you here is a profile essentially through the region where the ice cap was established. This is on April 14th, which was the peak wind event. And what I'm showing you here are the first, 5th, 50th, 95th, and 99th percentile winds based on all the April data from CARRA. And this is the wind profile during that event. And so you can see that the sustained winds were 15 meters per second at the surface. But interesting enough, they were associated with this low-level jet, where the wind speeds were in excess of 25 meters per second. And you can see that the winds during this event were close to or exceeded the 99th percentile. So this really was an extreme wind event, and they were just quite unfortunate to be there for that event. But you can see that this low-level jet is there in these statistics as well. And so one of the things that we're kind of working on is trying to understand what are the dynamics of these low-level jets and what is the interaction with the topography. This is using the CARRA height level data. And of course, it only goes up to 500 meters. And so what we've done is we've used the model level data above 500 meters along with the pressure level data, essentially to interpolate to constant height. And so you can see we now have data up to 2,000 meters. And so we capture essentially the whole evolution of this jet. So just to conclude then, Nares Strait is this important pathway for the export of sea ice from the Arctic. The North Water, the Arctic's most productive polynya, is at its southern terminus. Winds play a role in both the export as well as the formation. And so the narrow nature of the strait makes it a real challenge to characterize these winds. And CARRA, I think, provides a real unprecedented opportunity to kind of see these winds at very high spatial resolution. Thank you very much.